to surveys, fully half of Americans claim to have experienced a life-changing spiritual event that they could circle on their calendar in red ink. Sometimes it's as simple as, aha, and sometimes it is much more complex. Listen to what Don Eaton said about something he thought of as a sweeping experience of the Holy Spirit. And I said to my friend, man, I don't know why I was blessed to have this experience, because it's certainly nothing that I did. I was just driving along the road. And my friend just looked at me and said, I don't believe that for a second. I said, what do you mean? And he said, you've been knocking on the door one way or another as long as I have known you. You've been on a spiritual pilgrimage. You've been on a deep quest. I think the experience happened to you because you have been priming the pump for years. The people like Don, who go through meaningful events like this, often find that their outlook on life, their relationships, and their priorities change. We know precious little about the folks who lived in the caves and rock shelters on Mount Carmel near the spring of Elijah in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. They didn't tell us whether they had already had some transformative experience that rearranged their lives and caused them to leave everything behind to enter more deeply into a life of prayer, or whether they hadn't yet had that kind of experience, but set on a spiritual quest to prime the pump. Go on that quest, stay the course. They may not have been slumming it. The peoples of that region utilized caves for homes, for storage facilities, for stables, and for birthing rooms. Jesus was born in a stable that was a cave. The Carmelites were not the first to settle there. Archaeological evidence shows that the limestone caves and rock shelters on Mount Carmel have been inhabited for 600,000 years, since Neanderthal times. And there is evidence that the mountain has been considered holy at least since 1500 BC. We all know that the prophet Elijah had settled there about 3,000 years ago. Celia and I did not visit Elijah's cave, but the internet photos of the memorial chapel in that cave now suggest that he was definitely not slumming it. Elijah's cave was on the steep side of the mountain. The main chamber was about 46 by 26 by 16 feet. It was probably prime real estate on that mountain, being on the west side in an area that probably had a gorgeous view of the Mediterranean. The overwhelming and endless stream of electronic alerts and messages on our computers, phones, and tablets is driving demand for a new kind of summer camp for adults. Technology-free camps that force their campers to surrender their gadgets, the wallets, and that nagging fear of missing out. I don't know whether that's FOMO or FOMO, but those camps are booking up fast. In June, Digital Detox held its first session on Camp Grounded, a 3-day break from electronic devices in the redwoods of Northern California. At a price tag of $350, the event sold out. For their detox, our Carmelites chose another side of the mountain, the one that was hidden in a ravine. Their quest took them deeper into solitude, where they could live a life of prayer in separate places. They settled near the spring of Elijah, which served as a source of water for them and their livestock. These were troubled crusader times, and they built their monastery in such a way that the prior's cell stood as a sentinel guard post to a somewhat fortified living compound. Disconnect, and take time for solitude. You are sons and daughters, and not slaves anymore. In Roman times, freed slaves owed a special kind of allegiance to the master who set them free, a libertus cum obsequium, freed with a personal obligation, an obsequium, to come to the aid of the former master should the need arise. The Carmelite rule enjoins us to live in obsequio Jesu Christi. That is sometimes translated as walk in the footsteps of Christ. But Don Bugger, the Carmelite, writes, the basic feudal meaning of in obsequio was that of service, the service which a vassal rendered to a sovereign. And another scholar, Cicconetti, notes, following of or allegiance to another, obsequium, implied duties on the part of a master and subject. Those living in the patrimony of a feudal lord promised good and faithful service, assistance in time of war, and participation in resolution of problems or questions. In return, the Lord promised protection to his subjects. This secular meaning of in obsequio was transferred to the religious realm, to the service owed to God, or especially to Christ. In the 12th and 13th centuries, relationship with Christ was judged in similar terms. Traditional feudal values of service, of fidelity, of allegiance or following, of obsequium, of being bound to, of dedicating, governed by your responsibilities to Christ with a pervading influence that colored every aspect of daily life. We have been freed by Christ and are slaves no longer. Walk in his footsteps. Many of the buildings in Washington, D.C. are made with Indiana limestone. The National Cathedral is just one example. They are mostly gray in color, and if you look carefully, as I did as a young college student, making sure I was told right, you can find the imprints of small fossils embedded in them. The rocks on Mount Carmel, on the other hand, are the whitest limestone I have ever seen. They are also so chock full of fossils they look like giant pieces of nougat Christmas candy. And they are totally unsuitable for building. When the Hermits decided to build a chapel on Mount Carmel, they had to go to a quarry to obtain the stone. The path up the mountain was too narrow to allow the ordinary method of building stone transport to be employed, and thus construction must have come at great cost, both financial and physical. They built this chapel so that they could have daily Mass at a time when daily Mass was not the norm. The rule Albert gave them says, an oratory should be built as conveniently as possible among the cells, where, if it can be done without difficulty, you are to gather each morning to participate in the celebration of Mass. I was surprised at how small the chapel they built really was. It always seems quite large in all the pictures. In reality, it can only fit about 40 people. Stay close to the Eucharist. These hermits stayed in their own cell or nearby, pondering the Lord's law day and night and keeping watch at his prayers, unless attending to some other duty. If they could, they recited the canonical hours. If they couldn't, they recited the Our Father many times over. If we want to grow in holiness, we too must nurture our prayer lives, even if we think that our prayers are just refrigerator art for God. Take time for prayer. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, and the two other Marys. Likewise, the hermits also blended solidarity with their solitude for the mutual support they needed in this endeavor. They realized that it is far easier to grow in holiness when we are deeply rooted in human companionship. And so these hermits came together for meals and spiritual conversation. Gather around you, friends, for the journey. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother and the disciple he loved. Jesus said to the disciple, "This is your mother." In feudal times, the wife of the Lord became known as the lady of the place. So it was only natural that the hermits who had pledged fealty to Jesus Christ should consider Mary to be the lady of the place, and thus dedicate their chapel to her. And from that moment, the disciple made a place for her in his home. Take Mary into your heart. Scholars posit a couple of different meanings of the word Carmel, or Carmel, as it is pronounced in Hebrew. One is that the word means fruitful garden or land. And we can see an example of that usage in Jeremiah 2, verse 7, which reads, "I brought you into a fruitful land to eat its fruits and good things." The Hebrew word for fruitful land here is Carmel. I brought you into Carmel to eat its fruits and its good things. Another line of thought says that the carm part of the word is a derivative of the word for vineyard, and that the L part is God. So literally, it means God's vineyard. Whatever the exact etymology of the word, the gentle slopes of Mount Carmel were renowned as fertile places of great beauty and agricultural productivity. Be fruitful for the Lord. Archaeological digs have found both ancient wine and olive presses there. An ancient olive press consists of a huge stone pestle in a correspondingly large stone bowl. When olives are pressed, they automatically separate into 4 layers. The presser puts a dipstick in to see where the separations have occurred and how much of each he has. The top layer is the best tasting and is called the extra virgin olive oil. The next layer down, the virgin olive oil, is of lesser quality but still quite edible. The next layer down is too bitter to use for cooking and is used for lamp oil. And the bottom layer is the smashed solids. This is dried out and used for fuel for the fire. Pour out yourself into service. So there we have it, the simple rules of a holy life. Go on the God quest, stay the course. Disconnect and take time for solitude. Walk in Jesus' footsteps. Stay close to the Eucharist. Take time for prayer. Gather around you, friends, for the journey. Take Mary into your heart. Be fruitful for the Lord. Pour yourself out in service. Rise to the top. Become the Virgin's oil.